Welcome to the Green Wasp Removal YouTube channel. In this episode, we remove a busy German Yellowjacket ground nest located in the center island mulch area of a cul-de-sac in a residential housing development, and the groundkeepers who had been raking some of the mulch in this area got stung by some of the many forager wasps from this nest, so the neighbors asked us for help removing it. We were already in the neighborhood working on an Eastern Yellowjacket colony at a property just around the corner, so we ended up working both nests simultaneously for a couple of days. We were able to collect a good number of wasps and flash freeze them in dry ice to preserve their venom for Venom Immunotherapy, or VIT. The underground cavity where this nest had been built was very large. It was probably twice the size of a basketball in depth and in width. It had a lot of comb inside it. There were brand new queens being born. These are the ones who would hibernate over winter after they mate in the fall and then start their own nest in the spring. While most of this nest had already been hatched out, there were still a number of pupae that were queen cells, so this nest was still in the process of being very productive. Eventually we caught the foundress queen, which you see here, and if you compare her to another wasp in the nest, you can see how much larger she is than the other wasps, and we were able to capture her and get her contained. Here you see the numbers of combs that were inside this large cavity underground. It was a big nest. We caught it at the very tail end of its season, so the natural lifespan of this nest was winding down anyway. As we dug out this nest, we found quite a bit of paper that had been the envelope that covered the brood comb, and we'll take you down into this large cavity to show you what it looks like underground where the wasps had built this nest. As you see here, there were a lot of roots that had been supporting the nest. They had dug down quite deeply underground and extensively inside, so the diameter of this space was quite large. Looking at the space underground that wasps utilize to build these nests is very interesting. They build around the rocks, they build around the roots, and they just expand that nest space out for as large as it needs to be. Once we remove all the nest and the brood comb and the envelope paper and as many wasps as we can get out, we then go ahead and spray the whole area down inside this cavity with a non-toxic solution we make out of essential oils, which are peppermint, lemongrass, clove oil, mixed with organic soap and water. That's all you need. You never need poison or toxics of any kind to deal with a wasp nest. This solution kills and suffocates any live wasp that may still be inside that cavity with no problem at all. Finally, in this episode, we'll show you how we have this nest material in captivity back at our lab space in the barn, and we'll show you what the queen looks like compared to a typical male. This is the male on the top part of the frame here. You can see how much larger the queen is compared to the male. Male yellowjackets are always easy to identify because they have very unique features. You see how it has long, curved, kind of floppy antennae. It's much different looking than a female wasp. Their body's a little bit longer than a typical worker, and they're a little bit more lethargic. They fly less, they stay on the nest more than a female worker. This male, you see the end of its body, has no stinger. Now compare that to this female worker. This is a typical worker wasp. She's female, she has a stinger, her antennae are much smaller, and she's very active by comparison, out flying around, preparing to forage. So let's take you back now to October 4th, 2024, and we'll show you the entire job from start to finish. Thanks for riding along with us. Enjoy the show. Right, so the tenants just reported another ground nest over underneath the bushes here in the middle of the cul-de-sac mulch area. So we went and captured a couple of them here, and now we're going to check species. A note on voiceover here. The reason the wasps are not moving is because we knocked them out with a canned gas that allows us to get imagery. It's a very temporary knockout. They come back and fly around again after a few minutes. All right, based on the pattern on the back of these wasps, it looks like Vespula Germanica. So we're going to freeze the frame here so you can take a look at the pattern on the back of this wasp. You see how it looks like an arrowhead. That's very indicative of the Vespula Germanica species, or German Yellowjacket. Other key indicators are the uninterrupted yellow band along the side of the head and the small triangle underneath the wing. Another way to identify them is through the additional markings on the abdomen of the wasp. What you see here are black bands with dot patterns. Sometimes the dots are connected to the black bands, sometimes they're separate from the black bands. But either way, these are very common markings that you see on a lot of Vespula Germanica. So when you combine these indicators, it becomes relatively easy to make a quick field identification. And knocking them out for a moment with gas allows us to get good imagery on them and make a proper ID. As you can see in this clip, a couple minutes later, this wasp is already getting ready to get back to flying. She's waking back up. The gas is very temporary. So this has been a really handy way for us to get a quick field ID without harming the wasps. All right, here we have the Vespula Germanica ground nest. In this clip, you can see the wasps at the entrance of their tunnel that leads down into the nest, engaged in a behavior called fanning. This is where they beat their wings very rapidly to cause air to flow in and out of the nest. And this is part of the way they do thermoregulation, which is the way they regulate the temperature inside the nest to keep the larva at exactly the right temperature that is most conducive to growing in a healthy and rapid way. Vespula Germanica, or German Yellowjackets, are actually an invasive species here in North America. They're from Eurasia, so they're in the Mediterranean parts of the world, in Europe and temperate Asia and North Africa. And what's interesting about this species is they're extremely adaptable. Even though they're mostly from a temperate Mediterranean climate, they absolutely took to colder climates, where in North America, even in the northeastern states, they started nesting primarily in structures, sheds, houses, attics, soffits, basements, flooring, you name it, where their natural habitat is underground. All right, let's check on the collection here. Pretty steady flow getting sucked into the collection device, so we'll just let it keep rolling. So on this date, which was the 4th of October 2024, we were only concerned about swarm control to help the neighbors in this area not get stung. The issue we were having was a lot of the folks that lived in these homes around the cul-de-sac were elderly, retired folks, and they were not in any position to have a large swarm of yellowjackets all over their street. So on this date, we were not attempting to dig, we were just collecting. One of the most important parts of our job is safety, not just for our crew, but for anyone in the immediate area of these nests. As you can see here, the collection bottle filled up pretty quickly, and we were then able to go ahead and freeze this first batch. And at the same time, we were working another nest around the corner in this same neighborhood that was an Eastern Yellowjacket nest inside a building. We were doing an attrition collection there, and we did not want any of these wasps out and about. They were quite active and quite busy. It was a very warm, hot day in October, and they were active. The higher the temperature, the more active they are. So today we have two collections here. We have one Germanica collection on the left and one Maculifrons, that's Eastern Yellowjacket, on the right. So if you compare these, Germanica on top, Maculifrons on the bottom, it's pretty clear to tell Germanica are larger wasps and Maculifrons are a little smaller. When you compare them like that, it's easier to get a species ID. So if you're wondering what you have, if the wasps are very small compared to some others that you've seen, Yellowjackets, they're probably Eastern Yellowjackets. Very active, very aggressive. If they're slower and bigger and less aggressive, they're probably Germanica, at least in this area, northeast Indiana. So we're going to take these two, we're going to take the Germanica and the Maculifrons today and freeze them both. Putting them in dry ice, completely covering them in ice for at least 15 minutes. We'll let them freeze, and then we'll transfer them into dated and marked species bags, and we'll put them into a chest freezer till the end of the season when they're shipped out to biomedical labs. So a couple days later, we went back on October 7th, 2024, And on this day, we actually did the entire nest removal. We had first started with just collecting the wasps that were flying to reduce a lot of the swarming. And then we moved into digging the nest out. And this section of the video will show you that process. You see a white cloth put over the collection bottle here. The reason we use that is to help shelter the wasps that are in that collection bottle from the sun. We don't want them to overheat, so we put a white cloth on it to reflect some of the heat away and to keep them under shade. And that helps the viability of the venom itself inside the wasps. It helps that venom stay fresh so that the wasps are thriving and alive right up until the point where we flash freeze them to preserve the venom. Wasp venom is very sensitive to heat, so you have to be careful. So we went ahead and disguised the vacuum collection bottle with mulch, and this makes them less wary of it, and they go right back to the nest as opposed to exploring the collection device so much. Just makes the collection a little more efficient. So if you're orienting as a wasp, coming in visually orienting, it looks less scary now to come back to your house. As you can see here, there was a large evergreen tree right in the center of the cul-de-sac mulch area. And this tree, throughout the time we were working there, attracted quite a number of wasps. What you see here is a male wasp of the Eastern Yellowjacket species. And this wasp is identifiable as a male because it has long, somewhat curved, sort of floppy antenna. And it's out probably looking for a little bit of food and for a mate. This time of year, the wasps that are males on a nest are often driven out of the nest by the other wasps on the nest, by the female workers, or they simply leave on a regular mating flight. Either way, there's less food for them to eat. They're not allowed to be loafing on the nest anymore, taking resources away from the larvae that are left, so the workers will run them out, or they'll just simply leave to go out and mate. So this male wasp is probably out looking for something to eat here. Typically they would look on plants for any type of sweet carbohydrate fluid like nectar or sap or honeydew, that kind of thing. Meanwhile, down in the underground nest where these German Yellowjackets were, there were fewer and fewer foragers willing to come out of the nest, and there were almost none flying back from the environment to enter the nest. We knew at this point we were getting close to the time when we'd start the dig to pull the actual nest comb out from underground. So it's been a little over an hour. We've been doing collection only, and now we're going to take a look and see what collection we have, and then we'll start to dig. So as you can see here, the population had dropped quite a bit. We had collected most of them already. A lot of them mixed up with the debris in there. We'll separate that when we do the freezing. So we've completed most of the collection, and now we have to do the actual dig to remove the brood comb. So with these underground nests, there's always a tunnel opening that leads down into a much larger cavity where the actual brood comb is and where most of the wasps that are left on the nest are located. The easiest way to find that space is to simply feel around through the tunnel opening with your fingers. You can find where the tunnel runs, and it may be as deep as 18 inches or so underground, sometimes less, sometimes more. You can feel around as you're digging by directly probing with your hand to find out where that tunnel leads. That's the quickest, most direct route to do this. The other option is to just leave the hole alone and dig around the hole in the best guess you have as to where that cavity might be. Sometimes you can bang on the ground and hear a hollow sound. Sometimes you can't. But there's a couple ways to do this. Because the traffic had slowed down significantly, we were not too concerned about the flying wasps, so we felt pretty confident just going right for where the hole was and destroying the hole as we searched down through the tunnel. If you still have hundreds or thousands of wasps swarming around, you don't want to destroy the hole because you want them to keep coming back to and fro where that hole is located, and you can collect them that way. But since we'd already collected for a whole day earlier and for part of this day, we were ready to go directly to the nest. Yeah, here's some queens. As we started the actual dig, we started to see queens right away. These would be the new queens that were born at the end of the season, and now they're hatching out, and what their job is to go out and mate and then hibernate over winter and then start their own nests in the spring. From the probing, we could tell the direction of the tunnel was going right under all of this planted area, all this green, bushy material. We were going to have to remove a significant amount of that stuff to get to where the actual cavity was containing the entire nest. So it was going to become necessary to cut back some of this greenery. So that was the next step in this process. At the same time, we were going to go ahead and collect more of the foragers that started swarming out of the nest while we did the digging. And this controls the area. Basically what we have to do is keep the whole spot safe that we're working in, and the way we contain the wasps that start coming out of the nest, especially in a high debris area like a mulch pile that we were working in. This was a lot of debris, so we stopped using the Venom Immunotherapy collection bottles and we simply went straight to vacuum. And there's a little bit of water and soap inside the vacuum, and this allows us to control the whole area, not worry about debris. So that's what you see happening here at the same time that we start doing the cutback. And the reason we're not just simply using a giant weed whacker to take down as much of this area as possible is because in a very nicely landscaped cul-de-sac, we just have to try to minimize the damage we do to the planted material in that whole mulch area. So we try to do very targeted, very minimal trimming of any landscaping and plant material that's out there. So you see us using hand clippers to just take the absolute minimum amount of planted material out of there that we need to get access to the nest. Obviously, this type of surgical attack on a nest is a little more time consuming, but the clients surely appreciate that. So we're going to speed up some of the cutback footage here, about 4 times regular speed, just to save a little time here. Here we begin removing a lot of the dirt where the tunnel was. The tunnel had led us down into what we felt now was the cavity. So we're removing a lot of dirt. This is obviously 4 times faster than normal speed, but just to save time, we're removing a lot of the upper layer of the dirt. This is all above the nest itself, above the main cavity. And we'll slow it down here again in a moment, and you can see us begin to find nest material. Here we begin to pull comb out of the nest cavity, and the comb was mostly hatched out, and we'll show it to you again here in a moment. But it was clear as soon as we picked it up, it was pretty lightweight. Most of the cells were empty, which means most of the eggs had hatched into larvae. The larvae had pupated into adult wasps, and the adult wasps had vacated the cells. That's why you see very few white caps left on these cells, and most of them are simply empty, and there's nothing left inside. This is how you know a nest is coming to the end of its life cycle anyway. There's still plenty of live wasps that we were able to collect, but most of the nest itself was no longer producing life. The wasps themselves clean house when they leave for the season. They take pretty much everything out of the cells. Any leftover larvae, any leftover pupae that hadn't survived, they pretty much clean most of that out on their own. And as we pull more comb out here, you'll see that in a moment. A lot of it was empty, but there's also some of the new queens hanging around on these pieces of comb. So you'll see us starting to pull some of the new queens out as well. You see most of it's hatched out. Here's a queen. You see how large she is compared to some of the workers. Here's the queen cells. All of these are queen cells. They're much larger than the worker cells. Well, there's many queens now. So we'll freeze the frame here for a moment as you get a look at the gear we're using. One of the things that's very important on our nest collection is these plastic bins. We put all of the comb that we pull out and we stack it into these plastic bins to keep it preserved. When we get the bins back to the barn lab, if there's a lot of live pupae left in the nest, then we can remove them out and put them into a special habitat to incubate the pupae until they can hatch out and be collected for venom immunotherapy. If there's not a lot of live larvae left in the nest, we'll just let them dry out. Once they're dry, we can put them in the archive and we can use them for educational purposes, speaking engagements, trainings that we do with the Manchester University Wasp survey team. We can count the combs and we can count the cells in each comb to document the size of the nest at the end of the season. And we can also provide nests to collectors if they're interested in them. There's a lot of uses for an old wasp nest.
This looks like our queen. You see how long she is? Much longer than most of them.
Here we see the founding queen of this nest. She was the one who started the nest, initially found the cavity underground, and had thousands of eggs throughout the season. You can tell how the queen is darker than a lot of the other wasps. She's longer, her abdomen has been extended from all the egg laying, and she's a little bit more lethargic. She doesn't fly as well, she doesn't sting as readily. Because of that, she's pretty easy to identify.
Right. So here's the difference in size between the queen and the worker. See how small the worker is by comparison, and the young males also smaller. Alright, so we've got most of the nest out. Very large Germanica nest. A lot of layers of comb. Quite a lot of comb in this nest, but it was all hatched out. Most of the larvae and pupa and everything had developed already. In the bucket, there's still a lot of wasps and dirt that we dug out of the hole, and some paper that had been the envelope around the nest comb.
Once the nest comb and paper was removed from the cavity left behind was very large, at least 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet in width and depth. We're going to take you down into the cavity now and take a look at all the roots inside this cavity. The wasps actually utilize the roots as part of their engineering to help support the nest. You see how they dig around the rocks, the large rocks that they can't move. The smaller rocks that fall away as they dig out this space drop below the nest. Wasps are amazing engineers. The volume of dirt they can bring out of these cavities is pretty unbelievable. One little mouthful, one little mandible full at a time, bringing pebble after pebble out until they have cleared out a space this big.
So underground, I can reach all the way down to my elbow underground, and it's almost that wide as well underneath. It goes way under here, underneath the lip, all the way around. Very deep nest. So now we're going to treat the whole area with essential oil. So now what we do is take an essential oil spray, which is made up of peppermint, clove oil, and lemongrass. And we spray that in there, and it's mixed with soap and water, dish soap and water. And we cover the whole interior of the cavity. This makes it much less hospitable for them, blocks their pheromone, and reduces the likelihood that they'll come back here. It's a very large cavity, larger than a basketball by probably twice the size. So whatever's left in there will drown in the oil and suffocate. Then we layer in all the dirt we took out. And all the plant debris can be stuffed back in there a little at a time and sprayed. So we do one layer at a time. Dump some in, spray it, dump some more. So now what we do, now that we've dug the nest out and we've collected most of the foragers before we dug, there's now the few foragers left who were out in the environment before the dig and now they're coming back. And there's those that scattered when we did the dig and they're coming back looking for their home. And so what we do is we slightly disguise the collection hose underneath some mulch and we just leave it and they will come and explore it and suck themselves up. So we just keep the end of the hose right where their hole used to be, and they'll come over here and explore this area, and the suction will get them. All right, let's take a look and see what's left in here.
So once we got the job completed and we came back to the barn lab area, we opened up the vacuum just to show you what's inside. There's soap, there's water, some of the debris, some of the dirt, and the wasps that we could not collect for Venom Immunotherapy because there was just too much dirt and oil and mess to deal with. But this is what's inside the vac, and then we just dump that into a compost pile and it's done. And a lot of the wasps this time of year, later in the season, that might be left inside the nest or inside the cavity after we remove the nest, they're going to be males anyway, and males cannot be used for Venom Immunotherapy collection simply because they don't make venom. They have no stinger, they have no venom sac, so they're useless for Venom Immunotherapy. So we go ahead and just vacuum them up. October 8th, 2024. Here you see our Germanica queen next to a male wasp. So you can tell the difference between them. You see how long the male wasp's antennas are. They're long and they're floppy and curled. And even though he has kind of a long extended body, he is nowhere near as large as the queen. That's how we know that this wasp in the lower part of the frame is the queen. So this nest is mostly hatched out for the season, as you can see. We contained this one yesterday. So very little activity on the comb itself because there's not much hatching out of it at this point. And there's just a few worker wasps here and there inside. But basically this is a dead nest now, and we will use it probably as a display item because it was well dried out and there's not a lot of larvae in it to decompose, which is a problem for display nests. You have to clean them up. This one will not require much cleanup. There's a worker, a female worker. You can see how much different she looks compared to the queen. The queen is now at the end of her life cycle. She would not have survived the end of the season anyway. But once the males like this and the new queens for next year have been born, the old queen will die. The original foundress queen has served her purpose, and she will die at the end of the season. And the males will go out and mate with the new queens, and the new queens will hibernate over winter. And they will wake up after their hibernation in the spring and start their own nest. So if we let this male free, that would be his job. Go out, find a female to mate with. And there's still a few females out there from the nests all over town that he could mate with. Well, that's a female worker. That's it for today's episode. Thanks for riding along with us. As always, if you enjoy the content on our channel, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment to let us know you're there. Have a good one.